Welcome to PT Talk, the show where I try to dive into challenges and opportunities of owning, growing, sometimes letting go of our physical therapy practices. I'm your host, Tanny Crawford. I'm with Martin Healthcare Advisors. I'm the Director of Business Development, and I have got someone really special with me today, Lynn Festa. Lynn Festa is an occupational therapist, and she has a coaching company that helps to reignite passion, energy with specific personalized coaching, one-on-one sessions, group workshops, builds on your strengths and your values and clarity for the practice. So we'll get into that in just a minute. We can get some contacts from Lynn. But Lynn, this morning I was talking to one of our senior M&A advisors. We talk about content and different things in the market and the phone calls that we get. His name's Tom Carden, and he said it's important to keep the content relevant to today's physical therapy practice. So if you don't mind, take just a second and just introduce yourself and tell us about the coaching business and a little bit about your path, if you don't mind.
So I'm an occupational therapist. I graduated from Boston University in 1988. I've actually owned two private practices, one solo practice that I can talk about too. So I do have that experience of closing a practice. And then I'm married to an actually a certified hand therapist. I got my hand certification in 1995. So along the way, had a private practice here in Western Massachusetts that we closed during COVID. So I also have that experience too of closing not one, but two practices. But along the way, my story that I use for this is it was about 2012, and I kind of found myself disillusioned and feeling kind of burnt out, but not understanding what burnt out was. Because what I really want to talk about too is like at the time in 2012, this wasn't something we spoke about. You kept it very quiet because you were weak. If you couldn't keep up with 20 patients a day, what is the matter with you? So I started to go down this path, and I kind of took some different paths. At one point became a certified triathlon coach. That was fun for a while. But what was interesting is I was working in a clinic with physical therapists. Actually, I was the OT, being the hand therapist in that clinic. And they were so funny because they would come into the hand clinic, which was separate because I needed quiet in a hand clinic. And they'd be like, Lynn, coach me. And I'm like, well, okay. They're like, I said, well, I'm kind of doing. They're like, we don't care. We understand you're a coach. I need coaching. It kind of evolved because my people found me. So over the time getting out there, since then, I really opened Lynn Festa Coaching in about 2015 to really start to have the conversations. For better or for worse, with COVID, man, people started talking about burnout. And sadly, we tried to strike while the iron was hot and start talking about it. So this is good. Thank you, Tanny, for
sure.
We can continue to talk about it. It's still an issue.
Well, as the listeners can tell, you are a superstar guest, and I really appreciate you being on here today. You've been on TEDx Talk, right? You're kind of the brain behind
I did a TEDx.
Creating Sustainable Trust with Integrity-Based Medicine.
Yeah, thank you. That was brewing since 2011. Wow. And I realized that I needed to get my message out about that because I feel very strongly about making sure we are asking the questions. If you watch it, it's 11 minutes. It's a nice break during your day or something. Perfect. Everyone's got to sit still for 11 minutes. That was my talk about it too. Like, we need to start asking the questions about this and doing things for the right reasons.
So burnout is something that I kind of heard about, kind of tucked away as almost as a sign of weakness, or I'm doing something wrong here. But burnout in physical therapy is a term we hear a lot now, and you feel it. But let's unpack it just a little bit. PTs, OTs, speech therapists that own clinics, manage clinics, run multiple locations. There are long hours. There are emotional demands of the clinicians. Like you said, people reached out to you like, hey, I need some coaching. And that happens inside the practice because some people hit a wall and they don't know where to go. So it's not about just feeling tired. It can affect your motivation, your relationships, honestly, the quality of care that we deliver to the patient crowd. And one thing, which I bet you can touch on, is it doesn't hit you like all at once. It kind of sneaks up. So you've worked with a lot of clinicians in the space. What does burnout look like in kind of a day-to-day sneak up?
I love these questions. So I'm going to back up for just a second because we started to talk about it like being a sign of weakness and something's wrong with you. And I actually had a practice that I left shortly afterwards because they said to me, we're paying you this much money. You should do whatever we tell you to do. That's where I think my first experience did. So that is now, again, I thought, oh my God, what is wrong with me that I can't do 8 evals in a day? As a hand therapist, I didn't do like the carpal tunnel. I did the trauma. So really involved cases, everything has to be hands-on. And then fast forward 2019, and somehow I saw something online and I'm like, I gotta show up at this. And there was the National Academy of Medicine was meeting in 2019 in Chicago. And yours truly said, I'm gonna show up for this. Now, I was the only therapist out of about 100 people, and they were thrilled. But because we were starting to talk about it not being something wrong with the person. And that started the dialogue, and this is really important, called moral injury. And in a nutshell, to not get into it because we don't want to make this too long, but moral injury is when you're forced to make decisions that conflict with your values is probably the best short way to do it. And for me, I do a lot of work with values. I do a lot of work with strength. Again, you'll see that if you happen to watch my TEDx. Like for me, like honesty is a value system I can't compromise on. If I'm asked to do something not cool, it doesn't sit well with me. And that leads to that moral injury. And for me, equality is like one of those non-negotiable values. So those are the kind of things which are a little bit different than, so I call that the extrinsic things that are happening in clinics too. You know, we need to look at system, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the burnout is the analogy that I love to use. I use it with hand therapists because we would treat this too. And then physical therapists is tendinopathy. And we think of that patient that came in and said, I don't know what happened. You know, my elbow just started hurting all of a sudden. And we all know that that's not true. We all know our wound healing and things like that too. It's fun. I get to still like bring in, you know, hand analogies into my coaching.
Yes.
We gotta meet, you gotta meet my clients where they are, right?
Yeah.
But it's that tendinopathy where you think that it snuck up on you and it really didn't. You weren't taking breaks. You weren't doing things consistently. You're kind of pushing through the pain and ignoring some of those things, which you think you can just shake off, right, at first. But I also think, like, also in a nutshell, it's feel like you got up and got up and went. And you mentioned that motivation. I also feel like you just feel like something's off. And in a nutshell too, it's like you can say, well, you know, Lynn, you're kind of being kind of grouchy. I'm like, I'm not grouchy. Why do you think I'm grouchy? I'm like, because you're starting to snap too a little bit and things just feel really like, you know, something's not right. So that's where I ask people, pay attention to the early signs. Thank goodness I also feel like we're starting to do a lot more wellness and preventative things. Like we're actually talking about that. We talked about it 20 years ago, but we didn't do it. We just barreled our way through everything, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like, you know, if we wait long enough, it'll happen. So we're starting to do that too. So that's kind of the signs I mostly see with people too, but it's that analogy of tennis elbow.
Yeah, it didn't just start when you woke up yesterday morning.
They come in and it's like it's a cute problem, or you know, for me, carpal tunnel syndrome. No, it doesn't happen overnight.
I hear like self-awareness and being more self-aware and listening to your moral injury, if you will, listening to your morals, paying attention to them betters your chances of preventing it, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Are there any strategies that could help some of these clinicians manage or work on preventing the burnout before it comes into a full-blown tendon tear?
Yes, exactly. And that's really important too. And what I really like about having these conversations and the platform to be able to get it out is, of course, you hear the same thing and sometimes you're just like, oh my God, I need more than that. Like I work someplace too, they're like, take a walk and go be mindful. And I found myself like starting to scream, which again, burnout. And I'm like, I'm lucky I can get a chance to go pee the way you've overbooked me, right? So of course those are some of the more concrete things. I also call this the free low-hanging fruit. If somebody comes into your clinic as a consultant and says, I alone can fix it, pay me $5,000. I'm going to encourage you to like save your $5,000 because there's a lot of free low-hanging fruit. And I'm going to start with like, we all want to be on the winning team, right? And if we're going to win, I also very much love to be part of the arts. So I also like to include like orchestras and things. And the ones that work and sound the best are the ones that work together and they look out for each other and everybody has their position. So I think really as a clinic, even if you're a clinic of, you know, nobody's a clinic. Even when I was sole practitioner, I was a clinic of a couple people. Nobody does it alone. Is we all want to be on that winning team. It's really paying attention to each other. Now, the other thing that when people come to me and we start working, one of the questions I'll say is, well, when was the last time you took a break? And they'll be like, oh God, it's been like, I don't even remember. I don't have time to take a break. And that actually, thank you, because that's a sign of burnout, is when you think if nobody does it, it doesn't get done. I'm like, okay. Also, one of the disclosures is I'm actually married since we're an orthopedic surgeon. What I've learned as an OT by being with him for the past 20 years is what we do is not an emergency. It can wait. It can be urgent, but nothing we do is an emergency. So the very low-hanging fruit as a group too is don't allow more than each quarter that somebody at least takes a day or two off every quarter. It's kind of like if you're running a marathon, the aid stations are there for a reason. Those of us who have done any, like you heard me say before, any sort of what we do athletic training, we would never just have somebody sprint out and stay sprinting and not have any nutrition. Every quarter, everybody needs to take at least a day off. And that doesn't include to get your MRI done or your root canal done. It's to go do something for yourself.
Recharge.
And recharge, and whatever it means to you too. Which also reminds me too, it's like let people be their own people and let them decide what recharges them. There's nothing worse. We're like, well, I bought lunch. I'm like, well, first of all, I don't eat that. And second of all, I know like I'm somebody who needs a lot of downtime. So I don't want to sit with you people at lunch. I work with you. I need my alone time. I need to recharge. So let people recharge in a way that's meaningful to them, because we're all different. Just as we wouldn't treat the patient the same way, right? We all need to treat each other as individuals and what works. And use every little bit of your PTO. Again, nothing we do is an emergency.
Sure.
Nobody can have any PTO on the table. Also, low-hanging fruit, we all have times, we all know it's really busy, we're freaking out, but guess what? It never stays that busy and it goes slow. So maybe when it goes slow, take turns. It's a beautiful afternoon, you had a bunch of cancellations or whatever, take turns and say, hey Tanny, it's your turn, get out of here. I don't care what you do, but just get out of here. And that's a way to look after each other too, as opposed to, no, you sit here and you find something to do to be productive. So changing that around, I think too. It's a sign that we're all looking after each other. If nothing else, you write permission slips to each other.
Oh, that's good.
I give you permission to take a day off. And then taking the long view too, which is, again, easier for me to say as somebody who graduated a few decades ago. We have to keep our careers in perspective. It's a part of our lives. Because we didn't go into therapy and to the helping professions. We all know that not to make a lot of money. Let's be honest about that. We did it because we wanted to help people too. But then keeping that perspective that it's part of who we are.
Oftentimes, practice owners, it just kind of happens over time, but they take on that identity, and instead of a part of who we are, it becomes the whole of who we are. And so I'm hearing in your nuggets out there, I've made some great notes, but be self-aware of any moral or any tendinopathies, if you will, any pain points morally that you might have gone through. Take off once a quarter at a minimum. Be aware of your PTO. Don't try to just burn through and save your PTO to the end of the year, or not at all. Know your team. You have some team meetings time to time, and I talk about, have you ever heard of the 5 love languages? Everybody's got a love language, right? If my wife's love language is quality time and I buy her gifts all the time, that's not going to fill her love tank. So everybody on your team, believe it or not, has their own love language. Until you get transparent and have meetings and get-togethers to know your team, like you were talking about, if you and I work together and your love language is quality time and I bought you lunch from Subway or whatever and thought I was doing a great job because mine is gifts, and it's not going to fill your love tank, and so you feel unappreciated. I think you're not appreciating what I'm doing. So knowing your team really helps. That's so good. I like that. Thank you for that. And then hall passes, right? Permission slips. Let people know that, hey, get out of here. Friday afternoon, you don't have much. Let's not pack those in there. You guys get out of here. I love that. That's
because we know it's always going to get busy again too.
Yeah, for sure. Take a few minutes for yourself. Don't go get a root canal done. Take some personal time and really spend time recharging, right? I love it.
So when a client comes to me and says, I knew it's a break because I had to get an MRI and that was their chance to take a nap, that's a nice way to think, okay, hold on. It's not okay.
That's so good. I mean, again, we get calls at least every other week, and I hear frustration in the voice of the owner, and they've just been pushing and pushing and pushing, fighting the reimbursement decline, fighting the staffing issues, fighting higher pay raises every year, fighting cancellation rates and all the KPIs. But you've given us so much to think about today. Any nuggets that you've got left on the table?
Yes, I do. Very opinionated. So the other thing too is people always think more hours is better. And then let's go back to, the athlete training or the musician playing. Like more is not better. Again, that was part of my impetus for doing my TEDx talk, is like really asking what for. Patients don't have the resources either now, like we did, I think back 30 years ago. We're like, oh my God, this day was so hard. I had 10 patients. They don't have the resources now either more to show up. And that's some of the cancellation, is like making a good ROI on their time too, and that trust. Two is, more isn't better. The one thing I also like to point out is think about how you're doing things and where is that low-hanging fruit that you can make it better. And one of the frustrations I hear is like somebody who's not even in the department, like, in the trench with you, is the one making the rules. Go to the people in the trench and say, how can we make this better? Because there was a study that came out in 2015 by John Penkovel in the Economic Journal, actually. So let's talk money, right? Because at the end of the day, we got to pay our bills. And his research shows that after working 50 hours a week, your productivity is going down, which also means your errors are going up. And once you hit 60 hours a week, those are, we would call it in, the athletes world, like wasted mileage too, like junk miles. And we wouldn't have somebody doing that as an athlete, knowing like being more efficient. So looking for ways to be more efficient. But if you really want your team to feel seen, is go ask them, because I promise you, they're like, could we not write the same note out 3 times? I did work someplace there. I'm like, you can't ask me to you can't give me a half hour to do my notes, then ask me to write it, which don't get into that. Everything should be on a computer. Sure. Is how to be, there's always ways to be more efficient, but ask them and then they'll feel seen. And you know what, clinic owners, it's free. What can we do to make this work? And again, remembering all of this, you wouldn't ever tell your patients to go back and be like, okay, tennis elbow, I want you to go back and play full sets. No, you wouldn't. And then what do? We say, and then in the future, to prevent this from happening again, how are we going to break this up? So take everything that we know from treating our patients and apply it to ourselves. The other thing too, so that productivity is a big deal. So working harder is not working smarter. It's just wearing everybody into the ground.
It's just like wearing tennis elbow, working it harder and harder and harder. You gotta give it a break. Yeah,
like would you do that to your car? Why are you doing that to your body? And why are you doing it to the people that are there to make everybody successful too? And you know what? Again, breaks need to be breaks. There's definitely times, again, I'm not saying always or never, but allow like a break room and make it fun. And if somebody wants to bring their book in and just read book, let them read their book. If they want to just go sit, I needed at least 10 minutes of downtime. And I would just find anywhere I could go and just sit quietly, because I'm somebody, I identify as a highly sensitive person. It's 20 to 30% of us need to calm down before we can go back in. So that's that recharge. So if somebody's acting antisocial, maybe they're not. Maybe they just need to recharge and let them do what works for them. But you're sitting there eating your sandwich or whatever. You don't need to ask me. Wait until those are some of those things too, of boundaries too. That's also come into the language of burnout and everything, is boundaries. And respecting other people's boundaries too. So I think that's a big deal. When we owned a practice going in down the street, and I'd be like, this is a no question zone. And we know, man, there's days where you don't get those breaks too. So going back and looking at what's happening, why people are not getting, even a half hour break, it's not okay. We're running ourselves into the ground. So some of this we're doing to ourselves.
There are people out there that are kind of achievement driven. Your analogies are so great. I mean, football players don't play straight through a whole game. They've got timeouts. They've got 2-minute warning timeouts. They've got half times, intentional timeouts. And so I know a lot of you out there have done workers' comp or work hardening or work conditioning. If somebody's at a job and they're consistently, their back is tired, we tell them you have to take breaks. So why would we not heed our own advice mentally? Because we give our joints a break when we're going to the gym, or we know not to overtrain running mileage after mileage and get those junk miles in there. We're just doing it to ourselves. So being aware of that and saying, okay, self, I give you permission, give yourself permission to take a break, a mental break.
But even a minute or something too. One of the things I work on with people, I'm I know it's hectic, but that's where if there's a stairway, the way we set up our clinic, we could just take a couple laps just to shake it off and literally work up Peter Levine, the trauma work is that shake. If you're really, you have 30 seconds, but things are starting to go sideways and you got to pull it together. Because that's also, we're humans, is you literally just shake it off. But adding these throughout the day too will make a big difference. So that's where I joke too. I'm like, it doesn't mean like go down the street and get a cup of coffee and a donut. It just means like don't work yourself. Or again, why? What for? Why are you doing that too? So, okay, clinic owners, yeah, we're like the captain in our team to work, and maybe it's a hockey game. You know, the way that people kind of come in and out, and that watch the coach of next time we're, I like it because it's so quick. They're pulling lines, they're pulling people, on the fly, and they see somebody getting tired, they pull them and they put somebody else out. Just being aware.
Be the coach. John Maxwell talks about leadership, meeting your people where they are. And so knowing, acknowledging when your player, I don't know hockey lingo, acknowledging when your running back is getting tired or your cornerback is getting tired. Because not often, you'll see in football, baseball, sometimes they'll like, hey, pull me out for a second and swap somebody out to let them recharge. And so we're just not good at that as helpers because we just want to keep digging, but it's bad for us and it ends up.
Yeah, one of the last things too, which I remember too, now I can say it, I've been around the block. When I was a new grad, man, you need your paycheck, you don't really know what's going on. Everything just feels like you're constantly drinking out of a fire hose. But understanding them, now I think this age myself, the younger generation knows to speak up, and we're starting to have this dialogue, which
That's
is good.
So good. Yep.
Right?
So good.
But sometimes we're not. So if somebody comes in and they're trying to, something happened and they're human, instead of saying whatever, go up her butt and died or something, or Lynn's in a really bad mood, because I did have that happen early on. I didn't speak up and say, you know what, this thing happened, and here it's going to be an 80% day, or maybe it's going to be a 60% day, and I'm going to need a little backup because there had been a death. But I didn't know that I was supposed to bring that up. I just thought I had to show up at work or lose my job, and then my student loans wouldn't get paid, and it's all a catastrophe. But so really paying attention. If somebody seems a little bit off, they don't have to say what's going on, but just say, hey, I just hope everything's okay. And if you need to talk about something, I want you to know my door's open.
Yeah.
And they'll either say like, I'm fine or whatever, or they may be like, oh my God, this thing happened. I guess I need to talk about it because it's more traumatizing, and it's okay. I think seeing each other is like, we're not, one of my sayings too that came up early is like, we're clinicians, not magicians. And we're also just really human, and keeping that perspective. So I think that's the younger therapists out there too. Kind of end this on like a Rumi saying of like walking each other home, keeping our beautiful professions going as they should, because I think we do great work in the world.
I do too. Absolutely. And I would say to those clinicians, younger or experienced, lean when somebody asks you if you're tired, if you're feeling something, be okay to put your hand up and say, yeah, I'm really struggling. I lost somebody in my family, or can't get this range of motion. It's really bothering me, or whatever it is. Lean into that person that's asking, let them do their work because they've asked you, hey, if you want to talk, I'm here. And so lean into that and actually take action to complete that formula, right? So that it'll work.
Yeah, and it's again, giving everybody permission to learn. Think about how we got to places. Got lucky that I had mentors that were there. I had somebody when I was a hand therapist, I joked that she was my hand mom because I just needed somebody to turn to. Go find your hand mom or your PT mom or your PT dad or your PT uncle or somebody to kind of help that mentoring too.
Find that mentor and let them mentor you. If burnout is hitting close to home, if you feel like you're catching it early, great. Acknowledge it. Lean on your support system. We're giving you permission to lean into that support system and ask for help. And don't be afraid to pivot if you need to, right?
Yeah. So one of the other things, all these fun things that happened over the last 35 years is when I first started hand therapy. My mom is now retired, obviously, pediatric PT. And I was like 2 weeks into it, and I called and I was like panicking. And I said, oh my God, I don't know at all. And she's like, okay, the day you call me and say you feel like you know everything is the day you're done. So you're never going to know it all. So
that's exactly
lean into that. We're all looking stuff up.
Lynn, thank you so much for joining me today. If somebody actually wants to reach out to you specifically, what's your email?
It's at info@lynnfesta.com. My website is lynnfesta.com, and you can reach me through that too. Email me with questions. I love doing consults. I do 30-minute consults. Call in, let's just talk it through.
It's such a valuable asset to have. Is healthy mental health of the clinic is just as important as a 20% profit margin or a 92% arrival rate or 300 160 orthopedic surgeons that send to you. That mental health aspect is so valuable to your practice. If you need help with burnout, talk to Lynn. It's LYNNFESTA, Lynn Festa. LinkedIn.
Drop me a message on there too.
Yep.
Happy to if I can email you back or whatever, do that. If you want to jump on a call, I'm here. Again, we're walking each other home.
Lynn, thanks for joining us. This has been PT
Thanks for
M&A Talk. Tanny, Crawford. We'll catch you guys next time.